Funny how, sometimes, we spend our whole lives pretending we have control when deep down all we are doing is trying not to fall apart. And that is exactly why Saori Shibuki's story is so unsettling. It reveals the quiet side of people who always seem too strong to admit how broken they are. Maybe because, one way or another, everyone has had to put on armor just to avoid looking too vulnerable. And the most curious part, when we look at Shibuki, we notice a huge paradox. Someone who does everything to survive, but who at the same time does not know exactly what to do with her own life outside that chaos. As if the real world were an even more cruel game than the Borderland. And, if we are honest, how many times have you caught yourself trying to please a system that never seems satisfied, whether at work, in a relationship, or even within your own family? The truth is that Shibuki exposes a wound many people try to hide, the fear of not being enough. And it is exactly this fear that shapes our quietest choices. From accepting less than we deserve to, believing we have no alternative but to hold on. But what happens when life forces you to face what you spent years avoiding, when the game changes the rules and you have to change with it? That is when her analysis becomes so powerful. Because understanding Shibuki is not just about understanding the character, it is about understanding the part of us that learns to survive before learning to live. If you are a fan of cinema psychology and want to understand the mind behind your favorite character, go ahead and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss any video. But first, comment below which character you want me to analyze here on the channel. Now, let's go to the video. Saori Shibuki is introduced as the kind of person who arrives quietly, almost silently, but carries in her eyes a story that no one there could guess at first glance. She moves like someone who learned to survive in the real world long before falling into the Borderland, and that already says a lot. The way she observes everything, always calculating, reveals a bitter maturity. It is as if she is used to searching for escape routes even when none are visible, and anyone who has lived trapped in toxic environments recognizes that look instantly. Before any deadly game, Shibuki was just another worker trying to breathe in a system that swallowed her whole. And that is more common than it seems. The constant pressure, the veiled demands, the guilt that does not belong to her, but that she carries as if it did. Many people see themselves in her without realizing it because there is that feeling of always owing something to someone. And maybe that is why Shibuki arrives in the Borderland already emotionally exhausted. The curious thing is that, despite this exhaustion, she is not someone broken. She is someone hardened. Anyone who has lived in abusive environments knows how some emotional muscles build up without us noticing. Resistance becomes routine, distrust becomes protection, and suddenly, silence becomes the only way not to attract more problems. When the camera shows her for the first time, it is as if it reveals someone who learned to survive quietly but not intact. Shibuki carries a twisted sense of responsibility shaped by circumstances that should never exist. She believes she always needs to prove something, even when no one has asked. And this creates a tension that follows every one of her gestures. Anyone who has lived trying to please an impossible boss, a cruel corporate environment, or even a demanding family knows how this sensation settles slowly. The character reminds us that before the Borderland, people already face battles almost no one sees. There is something in her posture that screams, "I have failed before, so I need to get it right now no matter what." That is more human than it seems. Many of us carry these invisible scars, the ones that shape habits and choices even in moments that should be simple. And that is why Shibuki does not appear as a classic heroine, but as someone real. Someone who could be sitting next to us in any subway station, trying to reorganize her own life. When she interacts with the group, everything seems rehearsed, as if she is avoiding any misstep. This reveals a personality shaped by excessive caution, not by lack of courage. Sometimes living like this is like walking with an emotional suitcase that is too full, trying not to let anything fall out, and at the first chance to rest, the body and mind simply collapse. That is the energy she gives off, even without saying a word. The impression Shibuki gives is of someone who never had the right to make mistakes. People like this learn early to observe, analyze, and adapt quickly. They are experts at reading the environment because that has always been a matter of survival. And, ironically, this ability places her in a curious position in the Borderland. She seems to understand that every move matters, yet she still hesitates, as if there is always a shadow reminding her that any decision may cost too much. And of course, all of this emotional baggage travels with her into the games. Nothing she lived through disappears just because she is now fighting for something much bigger than hitting targets or avoiding scolding. The truth is that the Borderland only amplifies who the person already was before. And when we look at Shibuki through this lens, we begin to understand why her later choices carry so much weight. Maybe that is why, when her first emotional conflict begins, everything in her gains another layer we have not fully seen yet. What brought her here? Shibuki's story begins long before the Borderland, in a daily life marked by silent pressures that gradually shaped her way of existing. She worked in a company where the pace crushed any attempt to breathe, and the feeling was that she never did enough. Anyone who has lived that knows how this environment corrodes slowly, like a constant drip that wears down even stone. Deep down, she sought recognition but received only demands, and this imbalance would start to reflect in her choices. Her relationship with work was almost an invisible battle. She tried to be the perfect employee, the one who solves everything, holds everything together, shows no weakness. But the more she tried, the more her needs were ignored. It is like trying to fill a bucket with a hole. No matter how hard you try, you never see the result. This type of emotional wear creates a strange sense of emptiness, as if something in you is always being left behind. And Shibuki lived this to the limit. The curious part is that, despite everything, she still believed that one day she would be seen, that her effort would finally be recognized. This is something many people feel even outside fiction, that stubborn hope that keeps going even when it should have given up. The truth is that Shibuki just wanted to be noticed, valued, treated with dignity. But as happens to so many people, that validation never came. And when recognition is missing, emotional exhaustion takes its place. External pressures blended with internal ones, creating a weight almost impossible to carry. And when someone lives at that pace for too long, they lose their sense of limits. The mind begins to confuse obligation with identity, exhaustion with failure, responsibility with guilt. She began to believe that any mistake was unforgivable, and that made her increasingly vulnerable. This type of pressure can destroy self-esteem without anyone noticing. The situation worsened when her boss appeared as the figure who should guide her, but who, in practice, became the source of most of her pain. He used power as a weapon, like someone who knows exactly where to press to keep someone under control. People like that create environments where fear becomes a tool and insecurity becomes routine. And Shibuki, already weakened, ended up trapped in this sick dynamic that made her doubt even her own worth. This does not happen only in series, it happens every day in the real world. There comes a moment when the mind simply snaps. She began to feel responsible for expectations that were not hers, as if her role were to carry everyone's frustration. And when you feel responsible for everything, you begin to believe that any failure is the end. Shibuki was already emotionally on the edge of collapse, even if she tried to hide it. And anyone who has lived something similar knows how hard it is to admit you are at your limit. Sometimes not even we can see it. Before entering the Borderland, she already carried a sense of displacement, as if she did not belong anywhere, not at work, not in her own life. This feeling may be silent, but it is devastating. It is like always walking with one foot on the edge of a cliff, trying to maintain balance on a rope that never stops shaking. And when an unpredictable event appears, everything collapses at once. The Borderland then becomes almost a mirror of what was already broken inside her, and it is precisely this emotional baggage that explains many of the choices she makes when the game begins. Shibuki does not arrive in the Borderland blank. She arrives carrying an entire history of fear, guilt, and quiet survival. And if we look closely, we will see that every gesture she makes inside comes from something that began long before maybe. That is why her internal conflicts gain so much intensity when they begin to surface. And this leads us directly to the next point, where these wounds finally reveal themselves. Her relationship with her boss, Shibuki's relationship with her boss, was one of those that begin with small demands, disguised as guidance, but gradually turn into an emotional prison. She lived with someone who used authority like a thin blade, silent but deeply wounding, and this created in her a constant feeling of walking on eggshells, as if any movement could trigger an unpredictable reaction. Many people who have had a toxic boss know exactly what that feels like. It is a tightness in the chest that never goes away. Shibuki tried to please, meet goals, and avoid causing problems, but nothing seemed enough. He always wanted more, always raised the level of pressure, always demanded perfection, and when she failed to reach that impossible standard came the looks of disapproval, the emotional manipulation, and even that calculated silence that humiliates more than any word. This leaves deep marks. Before she realized it, she was already conditioned to seek approval from someone incapable of giving it. The cruelest part is that he knew the power he had over her. Abusive leaders identify vulnerabilities with frightening precision, and when they notice that someone needs validation, they turn it into an invisible leash. Shibuki, already weakened by the corporate environment, became easy prey. It is like when you are so tired that you accept any crumb of recognition. And, ironically, the more she tried to break free, the more trapped she became in that emotional web. This dynamic began to erode her self-esteem, making her doubt her own abilities. And when you have a boss who belittles you, the feeling of incompetence settles even in the areas where you excel. This reflects even in the way she walks, talks, avoids direct contact. Everything about her seems shaped by fear of making mistakes. People who have lived abusive relationships, whether at work or in personal life, understand this silent transformation. It breaks a person from the inside out. Shibuki's boss also reinforced that false narrative that she owed gratitude, as if he were doing her a favor by keeping her there. And this is one of the most common manipulations in toxic environments, turning pressure into opportunity, abuse into feedback, exploitation into growth demands. She began to believe it, and when you believe the abuser, you lose your sense of what is healthy. It is like being in a room with the air growing thinner but thinking it is normal because you got used to breathing less. Her emotional response was to shut down. Her silence is not coldness, it is defense. It is the body saying, I cannot take it anymore, so let's save energy. When a person reaches this point, any intervention from the aggressor echoes like thunder. Shibuki internalized everything, the guilt, the fear, the rigidity, and carried it to the borderland. The mind works like that. The trauma does not stay in the office. It travels with you even if you run physically. She carried those chains without noticing. This sick relationship also taught her to avoid confrontation. She developed an exaggerated sense of responsibility for the mistakes of others, a common reflex in anyone who lives under manipulation. So, when a problem arises, she automatically assumes blame, even when she should not. This would directly affect her behavior in the games, as she enters the Borderland feeling she is always owing something, always needing to prove something, always on alert. And this posture influences risky decisions. And it is precisely this emotional baggage, this history of silent psychological abuse, that makes Shibuki's next conflict even stronger. Because when someone spends so long under a cycle of pressure and guilt, the effect of that spills into other relationships, even inside the Borderland. And it is at this point that we begin to see the true impact of this toxic relationship, especially when she needs to deal with her own choices in the game, opening space for the next chapter. How Shibuki acts in the game inside the Borderland. Shibuki turns into someone who functions almost on automatic mode, like someone who has lived under pressure so long that the game feels like just an amplified version of real life. She observes before acting, measures each word, each step, each silence. It is a posture born of fear, but also of strategy. People who spent years trying not to upset anyone understand how this quick reading of the environment becomes an involuntary skill. She was already a survivor before she realized it. The most interesting part is that even there, she tries to maintain a facade of control, as if she could hide the inner cracks behind a firm posture. But when we look closely, we see the tiredness in her eyes, the kind of exhaustion that does not come only from the games, but from life. Every choice she makes carries disproportionate weight, as if any misstep could cost everything. And this sensation does not originate in the Borderland, it only reveals itself. The game is just the mirror. Shibuki acts in a calculated way because she does not trust anyone, and this is not coldness, it is a conditioned instinct. After years dealing with manipulation and unpredictability, she learned that depending on others can be dangerous. So, in the Borderland, she closes herself off even more. When groups begin to form, she participates, but without truly giving herself. She does enough to avoid drawing attention, but never enough to expose herself. This type of self-preservation comes from deep wounds. At the same time, there is a curious trait in her, the need to prove she is not weak. This appears in moments when she speaks more firmly or when she tries to take control of a situation. But this strength comes mixed with vulnerability, creating a contrast that reveals her true internal battle. It is like when someone tries to appear too strong precisely because they have been diminished for too long. The game only amplifies this silent struggle between fear and the desire to be seen. And when the rules are explained, Shibuki reacts with that tense expression, like someone calculating possibilities and risks, but also carrying hidden desperation. She is not only trying to survive the game, she is trying to survive herself. Each move is an attempt to escape decisions that have haunted her since the real world. Many people live like this, trying to compensate for old guilt with exaggerated actions without realizing they remain trapped in their own past. Her relationship with the other players is always marked by an almost painful caution. She speaks softly, chooses her words, avoids direct confrontations. It is not that she is naturally distrustful. She was taught to be this way. The Borderland only allows this to surface, and when she finally interacts more openly, it always seems like she is doing it against her own will, like someone who knows they need to get closer but fears the consequences. Relationships, for her, have always been a minefield. In the game, there are moments when Shibuki hesitates, and this hesitation says more about her story than any dialogue. She does not trust her own judgment because she spent years hearing that she was never enough. And when someone carries this scar, even simple decisions become heavier. Doubt becomes a shadow, fear becomes a compass. And without noticing, she begins to act like someone trying to avoid an invisible punishment. Even in a place where the boss no longer exists, trauma keeps commanding. This way of acting in the game not only reveals her pain, it prepares the ground for understanding her behavior in the relationships that arise there. Because when someone arrives so emotionally worn out, the way they connect or try to connect says a lot about what is broken inside. And this is exactly what appears in the next conflict, when Shibuki becomes involved with Shota inside the Borderland, revealing another side of this intense emotional dynamic. The relationship with Shota in the game, Shibuki's relationship with Shota, begins almost like a calculated mistake, an approach that mixes emotional need with survival strategy. She sees in him someone vulnerable, someone easy to read, someone who poses no threat. And at the same time, she sees a chance to anchor herself in some type of bond, even if superficial. Anyone who has gone through moments of great fragility knows how sometimes we seek support in places we would not choose under normal conditions. It is human, even if it is not pretty. Shota, on the other hand, gives himself with an almost painful ease, allowing Shibuki to see in him what she fears most, someone too dependent on affection. This awakens in her two opposite sensations, comfort and discomfort. Comfort because she recognizes that deep longing that also lives within her, even if she hides it better. Discomfort because she knows she cannot meet his expectations. It is like when you receive affection you are not sure you deserve, and it places you in an uncomfortable position. The relationship between them becomes a sort of silent agreement. Shota offers blind trust, and Shibuki offers partial presence. She does not give herself fully, but she also does not pull away. She creates a strange middle ground, typical of someone whose intimacy has been manipulated before, and this says a lot about her difficulty connecting in a healthy way. People who have experienced emotional abuse often avoid deep bonds, yet at the same time miss them. It is a paradox difficult to manage. In some moments, it seems like Shibuki tries to use Shota as an emotional crutch, something to support her temporarily. But it is important to remember she is trying to survive without complete emotional tools, and this makes her actions appear cold or calculating, when in truth, they are a form of defense. It is not cruelty, it is self-protection. Like when you lean on someone just enough not to fall, but not enough to let that person fully hold you. The most complex part is that Shota idealizes her. He sees her as strong, beautiful, mature, almost unreachable, and idealizations always create impossible expectations. Shibuki notices this too quickly, and it pressures her even more. After all, when someone puts you on a pedestal, any gesture can feel like a disappointment. This is the kind of dynamic that quickly poisons bonds. And in the Borderland, where everything is too intense, this effect is amplified. There is a moment when she tries to show affection, even if in a distorted way. It is as if she is testing her own ability to feel something real, despite the internal chaos. But the gesture does not come from a place of romanticization, it comes from emotional exhaustion. It is almost a silent plea for rest, for closeness, for something that reminds her of life outside. Anyone who has felt emotionally suffocated understands this instinctive search, even if it is not rational. At the same time, her behavior with Shota reveals how much her wounds still control her relationships. She does not know how to balance closeness and distance, protection and openness. And this constant oscillation creates tensions that neither of them has the emotional maturity to handle in that scenario. Their interaction becomes a small metaphor for Shibuki's own life, a cycle of approaching and retreating, of desire and fear, of need and guilt. All of this slipping through gestures she tries to control. And of course, the relationship with Shota ends up revealing what will be decisive for her next conflict: the difficulty of dealing with moral choices when survival is at stake. Because it is impossible to talk about Shibuki without analyzing the weight of the decisions she makes in the Borderland, and how each choice, including those involving Shota, exposes everything she tried to hide from herself until then. All the conflicts Shibuki carries, from the emotional abuse by her boss to the complicated dynamics within the Borderland, shape a personality marked by a constant need for emotional survival. She acts like someone who always lives with a shield raised, even when no one is trying to attack, and this creates a rigid, calculated, almost mechanical posture. But behind this rigidity is someone desperately trying not to fall apart. This kind of defense is more common than it seems. The truth is that Shibuki learned to read the world through pain. She developed that skill many people have of anticipating conflicts, predicting emotional risks, avoiding anything that might hurt. This makes her choices seem cold, but in reality, they are choices of someone who has been hurt too much. People who have lived in toxic environments understand this mechanism well. You do not decide what you want, you decide what hurts less. And this shapes everything. When we look at her actions in the Borderland, it becomes clear how the past influences every decision. She does not think like someone free, she thinks like someone conditioned. Every move is born from the logic of not being punished, even though there is no longer a boss to punish her. This mental habit becomes a shadow that follows all her steps. It is like when you leave a bad situation, but the feeling remains registered in your body, your reactions, your instincts. She lives like that. Her relationship with Shota also highlights this psychological construction. She moves closer and then away, like someone trying to control the intensity of emotions to avoid losing balance. It is the typical response of someone who has suffered emotional manipulation, wanting connection, but fearing its impact. And this leads her to make decisions that seem contradictory, but are actually coherent with her emotional history. The internal chaos mixes with the urgency of the Borderland, creating erratic and deeply human behavior. Another important point is how she perceives guilt. Shibuki carries the feeling that everything is her responsibility, even when it is not. Therefore, many of her choices seem heavier than they should be. She tries to compensate for mistakes she did not commit, tries to avoid pain that has not even happened. This reveals a mind that always expects the worst because the worst has always been present in her life, and this distorted perception of reality defines how she acts in the game. At the same time, there is in her a subtle spark of resistance, something that does not allow her to completely surrender to despair. This spark appears in the small attempts to regain control, in moments when she raises her voice, in the rare times when she lets someone get close. It is like that hidden strength everyone carries, even when they believe they have nothing left. This ambiguity, fear and strength coexisting, is what makes Shibuki so complex. These factors also make her see the Borderland not only as a threat, but as a kind of stage where her own wounds take shape. She interprets each game as an involuntary moral test, as if she were forced to relive all the pressures she faced in the real world. And this leads her to extreme decisions, not out of coldness, but because, for her, everything always feels like a matter of life or death, even when it should not. She acts through pain, not strategy. And in the end, when we understand how her story, her traumas, and her relationships intertwine, it becomes clear that Shibuki never acted only for the game. She acted for the weight she carried long before entering it. Her choices are the reflection of a mind trying to save itself from old memories while facing a world that demands immediate courage. And this constant clash paves the way for the final step of her analysis, where we finally observe the final impact of all these scars on her emotional journey. So, what did you feel while diving into Shibuki's mind? Did any moment make you think, damn, this feels like me now? Tell me which character you want me to break down in the next analysis. It can be someone who intrigues you, who provokes you, or even someone you never managed to fully understand. I love it when you suggest unexpected names, because something powerful always comes from those choices. So go for it. Drop it in the comments. And of course, if this content helped you see something new, do not forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you will not miss any of the next psychological dives we will take together. I promise, there is still a lot of deep and surprising stuff coming your way.